Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Marcia Wegman is what you would call a Renaissance woman, an artist, skillful gardener, businesswoman, avid reader, community volunteer, dancer, seamstress, wilderness traveler, and much more. A magna cum laude graduate of Miami University of Ohio, Marcia majored in graphic art. She came to Iowa City for graduate study and completed her Master of Fine Arts degree in 1961. She and her husband began a business in collecting and selling antiques. This eventually led to their opening that exceptional store, Things and Things and Things. For the community, she helped create the space for the Johnson County Arts Center. Later, the members of the Johnson County Arts Council elected her president. Marcia organized the first paper fiber juried art show and began Dance Focus, a group that provides hospitality to dance companies that perform in Iowa City. In addition, she was one of the original board members of iCare and served as past chair of the iCare board. Marcia Wegman's story has been both an outward and inward journey. Nature and spirituality have influenced her and her work. A sports enthusiast, Marcia loves the wilderness to camp, climb, and water raft. Her daughter Cyril, also an artist, lives in Chicago. Instead of filming One of a Kind in public access television studios, we are in the home of Marcia Wegman. And we will get a peek at her house and to see some of her wonderful artwork. Marcia, before we tour your house, I'd like to ask you about your first family. I know you were born at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C. in 1935. Tell me about your father and your mother and their influence on you.
My father was an engineer, and while we lived in Virginia, one of his assignments was the inland waterway, checking that was open, check the dredging, and if it needed to be used, it was clear. And he also did a lot of work on the Alaskan Highway in the very early 40s, I think. And I never knew him real well because he wasn't home that much. He was off on these various assignments. My mother loved life in the military. She was a very social person. She did not mind moving from place to place. It was easier for her to make new friends. And she had a very good life that she thoroughly enjoyed. So when my father died, when I was age 9, it was very, very, very difficult for her.
What did he die of?
He died of coronary thrombosis, very sudden, although there had been indications of some problems. But he was only 54 when he died.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
What did your mother do, and you?
Well, it was a big adjustment. First, we had to move out of our very nice big house. This was in Columbus, Ohio, in the suburb of Bexley. And then she got a job working in the library of Columbus School for Girls so that my sister could afford to go to school there. My sister decided she wanted to go to a private school. And my mother discovered that she loved working. She'd really never worked before in many, many years since she'd been married. She'd had 3 children. And after she put my sister through school, then she got a job working as a receptionist for a family doctor who was also a family friend that lived close by, and she adored that. She loved the challenge of learning new things, and she became more and more valuable to this doctor and learned to give shots and do all kinds of things. So it was a big and an important change for her. But then when I think I was a freshman in high school, she fell down the stairs, had a slipped disc, when other methods didn't help her, she had surgery. She ended up having, I think, 11 operations over the next 20 years on her back and was never out of pain from that time on.
And she obviously had to quit work.
She had to quit work, which was very hard for her, curtailed her social life. And I think what I really learned from her was courage and optimism. She always thought next month things were going to be better, she'd be able to be more active, she could do this and that, and she never gave up hope.
What a wonderful gift to be given.
Yeah, truly.
So when your mother was trying to get better or survive this fall, you were busily active, I mean really active in high school, Marcia, not just, you know, I would assume the arts, but you were involved in sports, big time, weren't you?
Right, very, I loved, field hockey was my favorite, and my friends never believe when I tell them that I was sports queen my senior year. We had an unusual athletic program. We weren't a real big school, but we had a women's interscholastic program, so our girls' team played other schools in hockey and basketball and tennis, all of which I participated in, and just loved. We had a very good coach that you know, was inspiring for all of us, and close friends developed. Actually, these were friends that went back to grade school. Several of them I'm still close to.
Did you dance in high school?
I did, but what I did in high school is that I took up ballet. And I had, from the time I was a young child, I had wanted to take gymnastics or some kind of dance, but the logistics were too difficult of getting me downtown where the only ballet studio existed. So when a young woman opened a ballet studio right in my community that I could walk to, 3 other friends and I decided that we were going to take up ballet. Now, we were not going to wear those leotards. We weren't going to that way. So we started out in our little shorts and blouses and our little ballet shoes. But that was a very important part of my high school life. The teacher was wonderful. We became close friends. And I realized ballet certainly wasn't my forte, but I did go on and studied modern dance all through college.
At Miami?
At Miami University.
And just a few years ago, didn't you dance?
I did, and this was a highlight of my life. I had taken some dance with Joe Lachey and with Marcia Thayer before that, but hadn't done any dance probably for 15 years. Also did some dance with Mary Lee Leitch when she had a studio here. And when Beth Corning, who was on the dance faculty for several years, asked me if I would like to be in a dance production of hers, I assumed she meant doing a narrative part, because she had some narration in other pieces I'd seen, never dreaming she intended for me to actually dance. And then I found out, oh, of course you're going to dance. Well, it turned out to just be a wonderful experience because my friend and I, that we were partners, were dancing with 4 professional dancers. One man had come from New York, one from Las Vegas, and Beth and David Marchant, who was a graduate student. So it turned out to be a very exciting experience, and I loved doing it. And the reason that we were asked to do this is the theme was aging and the perception of aging. So it depicted 3 couples at different stages of life, and we were the older couple.
Did you dance at Miami University?
Yes, I
did.
did.
You did do that. After you graduated in graphic art from Miami, you came to Iowa. How did you hear about Iowa? How did you get to Iowa City?
That is a good story. All through college, I worked in an office doing statistical work for a research program that the university was doing for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And they were using male students to do different kinds of experiments that had to do with equipment, I suppose, for airplanes. And we would help run the students through these things and then just work with the statistics. The head of the office was Dorothy Pownell, who lives in Iowa City and had grown up in Iowa City, and we became good friends. And she talked so much of Iowa City, of the university, of the art department, of her sister Ellie Simmons, that when I decided I wanted to go on to do graduate work in printmaking, she suggested I applied here. She said, oh, we have an outstanding printmaking department, and Marcia Lazansky is world-renowned. And so I applied and was accepted to graduate school, and came the semester following my graduation from Miami University.
And you met Tom, who was a painting student at Iowa, correct?
I met him the following summer. He had taken 6 years off from school. He had completed 3 years of business school, then went into the Air Force just at the tail end of the Korean War and became a pilot. And just about the time when he decided he would stay in the Air Force and make a career out of it, he had to go to Little Rock, Arkansas, where he found it terribly boring after Florida, where life was very pleasant. And he was so bored that he took up some painting. And he had never done any kind of artwork. His family had all been in business and been bankers. And so when he came back, he decided to get out of the Air Force, come back to the university, finish his business degree, but he took some beginning painting classes. And that's where we met. I was modeling for his painting class, and then he decided he wanted to go on in art.
And after you were married, a few years later, you had your son Kyle, and a few years later, your daughter Cyril. Tell me about them.
Well, Kyle was on the go practically from the minute he was born. I think at age 9 months he was off and running. He was a character. He was very unusual, very independent, very unexpected, and quite delightful. But he was a bundle of energy. And Cyril was quite different. She was born 2 years later. But fun children. I thoroughly enjoyed them. However, I was always grateful I had the store to go to. I don't think I was cut out to be a full-time mother, but I had the best of both worlds because I was always home in the morning and then went to work in the afternoon. I found that was a perfect balance of raising children and working.
I didn't realize, Marcia, that you started out in the business world, first collecting and selling antiques.
Yes.
And where were you located to do this?
We had an incredible apartment in downtown Iowa City. It's kind of where Yonkers' second floor is located right now. And it was, years ago, it had been a dance hall. It was a huge, huge space, very inexpensive, and it was the kind of place that was literally handed on through the art department. You know, always word of mouth. It was such a desirable place to live. They never had to advertise it. And when we acquired it, it was huge, and we didn't have very much furniture to put in this large space, so started going to farm auctions. And fortunately, we both loved primitive, had similar tastes. We loved the primitive furniture, and we learned how to refinish it. And this was in the early 60s when you could buy things for just nothing. It was, people just weren't on to country antiques at that time. So we furnished our apartment, a big apartment this way, and then met a couple of men in Chicago. I was doing an art fair there, and they were antique dealers. They were the first to develop a place on Wells Street and bought property there when it was pretty run down. They convinced us to be what they call pickers, which is wholesale antique dealers. And we would buy things in the Iowa countryside and then haul them into Chicago and unload them like peddlers on the sidewalk because there weren't driveways or alleys or anything like that. To the antique, there were quite a few antique dealers on Wells Street at that time. And after doing that several times and hauling half of it back up the 2 very long flights of stairs, we decided, well, maybe this isn't such a good way to make a living, and maybe we should have a little antique shop here in Iowa City. And Tom, I had gotten my degree by that time, an MFA in printmaking with Marcia Lazansky, minored in painting. Tom still had 2 years to go to get his MFA. And I really wasn't qualified for much other kinds of employment, so we looked to this idea as a way to get Tom through graduate school, at which point we assumed he'd go into teaching. Well, he very quickly found a little spot which was in the basement of an apartment building down on the corner of Clinton and never remember the name of it. Wright, I think is. It's right across from where the old railroad station used to be. In fact, this had been an apartment, had been a hotel, and it was kind of geared to the railroad travel back at that time. And we started, I believe we started on $1,400 was our total capital, half of which we borrowed from my mother. I mean, first of all, in many ways we were naive, and yet Tom did have some good business sense through his banking family. His father had been a bank examiner for many, many years. But we were at the right place with the right thing at the right time. And so we totally renovated this basement, which had wonderful potential in that it had never been touched. Dirt floor, stone walls. We changed the entryway, had just been one of the old, lift top cellar door entryways, which I made into my first little greenhouse by putting fiberglass over the top. So that was the beginning of our business, which we call Things and Things and Things. And when we first opened, it was primarily antiques, but we had a few contemporary things, just a few things that we felt weren't available, some teapots and tissue paper and Japanese lanterns.
By local artists or by artists?
No, they were imported. We opened in September, and that first Christmas, a very close friend of ours who was also in the art department made some charming Christmas ornaments for us. And after that first Christmas, we realized that it was the new things that were selling and kind of paying the rent, and the antiques were the gravy. So gradually, we added more and more contemporary gift-type items. We started going to the gift show in Chicago and, began exploring the different sources that were available, but continuing to buy antiques and always using the antiques to display on. We had used old barn lumber for one wall, which was way before anybody had thought of doing this. And I would, much of the time, Kyle at this point was in the picture. He was an infant. And I would take him down to often Tom would be home working on his thesis and taking care of Kyle, but when he had to be in school, I'd have him down there with me at the store, propped up in his infant seat on the counter.
Selling your primitives and teapots.
Yeah, so he was a part of the early business. And
when did you move to the location where Things and Things and Things
about a
is
year
now?
and a half later, we found out that the Maher drugstore, which had been on the corner of College and Clinton for many years, was about to move to California. And friends said, why don't you move downtown? Well, by this time we had grown to so love Iowa City that we really wanted to stay, and we realized that we could not make a living where we were in the basement, that if we wanted to have it our main living, we had to get a location where there was more walk-in traffic and locate downtown. So we decided that we would do this. It was an enormous risk because, the rent was here and it suddenly was up here. But that would have been 1963, I think, that we moved downtown.
In that wonderful store and space that people bring their friends from out of town to show them one of the most fun stores in Iowa City. I know many people have done that. When was the fire that made
1970.
1970. Tell me about that.
It was on January 20th. It was one of the coldest nights of the year, 20 below, with an enormous wind chill factor. They think the fire started in the office of the Paper Place, which was a bookstore next door to Things and Things. Started about 7 in the evening. There was such a wind that the firemen were afraid it was going to take the whole block. We weren't there, but apparently people were carrying files and things out all that whole big block, so they got up on the roof and pushed the fire into our store, which was on the corner, in order to contain it. So it was totally destroyed. Now, Tom and I didn't find out about it till 3 days later. We were off
Collecting antiques?
antiques in Missouri, and we were so casual about going away and leaving our children. We had a wonderful woman that came in and took care of them. We didn't bother to call at night and say, you know, we're so-and-so, because we didn't know where we were going to be. She was frantic trying to get hold of us. And it wasn't until we decided to, on the way home, to stop and visit friends in Champaign-Urbana, who heard about the fire through a mutual friend here and realized we didn't know about it, and they were the ones that had to inform us that our store no longer existed.
You have a wonderful piece in your kitchen that that survived the fire. What's the story on that?
It is one of the few things that survived the fire. It is a wonderful pine hardware chest that we had bought in Pennsylvania some years before and refinished. It has lots and lots of little drawers in it. We used to keep our Matchbox toy stock in there. But when the store burned, the wall fell in on top of it, knocked it over, and protected it. There are a few little burn places on it, but that wall kept it from being consumed by the fire.
During this time, you were mothering, you were working in a business. What happened to your art work?
Oh, well, that's a good story. When the children were young, after graduate school, I continued painting and drawing. I didn't have the equipment to do the printmaking, but I'd also realized that I really did not have the temperament for a printmaker. And I had to go through 3 years of graduate school to realize that, which I think is part of the purpose of graduate school. But everything I learned applied to any other medium in art. I just felt that printmaking was too slow and indirect, and that I needed something quick and spontaneous, so that painting and drawing was more suitable. So I did a little work, but then it got very frustrating when the children were actually trying to paint on my canvases with me, or I thought, this is not working, I think we must make changes. All the time hearing Mauricio Lazansky say, oh, you women, you'll just get married and have babies, and that'll be the end of the artwork. I thought, well, yes, I got married, had babies, and it will have to be the end of the artwork temporarily.
You always knew you were going to go back.
But I thought, I know I will go back when the time is right. I will go back to it, and I'm not feeling guilty because I've gone through all this training and, you know, I'm not doing the artwork. Well, it took 15 years before I went back to it, and it was a conversation with Jeannie Patrick that stimulated me to go back. She was telling me how much she enjoyed teaching the Saturday evening classes, and that there was such a wide range of people, some, you know, professional artists, some who'd never had any artwork. And I thought, oh, I think I'd like to do that. So I signed up for her next semester for a drawing class, and followed that with a watercolor class. And that was 1977. That really got me going, and I've been working ever since.
And we're going to get to that when we tour your studio and see your things that you've done. I do want to talk about one of your great loves. You have quite a few, Marcia, I've noticed. And is your love of gardening. Tell me what this means to you. I hear you're a really artistic gardener that knows her plants and knows design. And what does it give you?
It probably gives me as much satisfaction as anything that I do in life. There's something so enriching and fulfilling about watching things grow and working in the soil. I can just hardly wait to get out there and digging in the ground in the spring. And to me, it is worth putting up with the long, cold, sometimes gray Iowa winters for those first few weeks in spring when little things begin appearing out of the ground. I mean, to me, that is absolute magic, and I just love it. But the garden, like a lot of other things I do, is just a kind of creating and a putting together, and I love it.
I wish
Even the weeding I find very meditative, very relaxing. And
that's very good physical work
yeah,
too
good
for your
workout.
body.
Yes.
I wish we were filming this one way in the spring to see your yard, because you're very proud, I know, of what you've done.
Yes.
You've done it all from scratch. Didn't you remove great trees in this yard?
Yes, I did. When I bought this house, it'll be 8 years this summer, it had been neglected for many, many years. Nothing had been done. So everything was totally overgrown. There was no sun, nothing bloomed, and so I really did have to start from scratch and remove a lot of trees in order to get the kind of light that I wanted.
And your gardening has gone into your artwork.
Yes, yes. Well, it's always, I've always looked to nature for inspiration for my artwork, and back in the early or the late 70s when I started working again with watercolors, which I had never tried, because when I was in graduate school, watercolors were considered only for Sunday painters, and serious artists didn't dabble in watercolors, so, you know, I had no exposure to it. And that opened up a whole new world, and it was such a perfect way to work with flowers in the garden. So a lot of the early work I did then was from the garden or plants or flowers I had indoors. And it has continued to, you know, come in and out of my work. But more recently, and when we go into the studio, we'll see a painting that comes directly from the garden. So.
Before we do go in there, another important part of your story, I know, is your work with the New Age group. I don't know, did you begin it or you've been a part of it? And that inward journey of yours.
Yes, that has been as important as anything to me, and I credit that the real beginning of it goes back to my childhood, because in retrospect I realized that I was always searching for something spiritual. I couldn't put that term to it at that time, and I think what I found as a child was camp. At age 7, I started going to a little campfire girls camp in a very beautiful part of Ohio, and that meant so much to me. I went every year. I became a junior counselor and a counselor, and I think it was a combination of the closeness to nature, the camaraderie of the other campers and the counselors. It was a kind of an emotional fulfillment that I missed at home. It wasn't, you know, I had a loving family, but in a different sense. But it was really the death of my son Kyle in the crash of a private airplane when he was 12 years old in 1975 that sent me into a very direct and intense spiritual search. You know, what is the meaning of death? When he died, I had a very strong sense that he wasn't gone, and that some aspect of him would always be a part of my life, and there's always be some kind of communication, and that although he was physically gone, he was spiritually still very much present. So I began doing a lot of reading, and later it wasn't until about 1979 that I began that I realized there was something called the New Age School, and that there were several people who were very gifted psychics who were teaching metaphysics, and so began taking a class and got very involved with the New Age School, which had been going for about 2 years, and it was just a very small grassroots group of people, but very dedicated to learning and growing. And then the people who really were the founders of it all left town, and another friend and I took over the running of it, which I did for about 4 years in the early 80s, and every Friday night, year-round, I had something called a Friday Night Forum in my home.
Is it still going on?
No, it stopped around, it really stopped when I moved to this smaller home and couldn't accommodate so many people. But that has probably had the most influence on who I am and how I have grown and how I have dealt with some difficult life challenges.
Like your mother, too.
Yes,
She did that. I see a thread that just is flowing through your life story, is, you know, from your artwork to your community work, to your gardening, to your metaphysical study, and your travel and the outdoors and the wilderness. You love to travel, and
Yes,
you love to
I
be
do.
outdoors, don't you?
Mhm. And that came, the hiking and camping came kind of late in life. It's something that I did as a child and a teenager, and then didn't do anything until I was in my early 50s. And it's kind of an interesting story how I got back into it. I was taking a Tai Chi class, and with a wonderful, Gary Howe was the instructor, and this was about a big group of 35 people, all in a big circle, and to introduce ourselves, he asked each of us to say where we were from and where we would go on our ideal vacation. So I gave it a little thought, and when it was my turn, I said, I'd go to the mountains. I don't care where, I want to be in the mountains. And I got to thinking about that later, and I thought, well, Marcia, nobody's keeping you from going to the mountains. Go. And then through good friends, I discovered the Sierra Club and the wonderful, inexpensive trips that they provide. So I did several backpacking trips with the Sierra Club in the Sierra Mountains in California, and I've done some service trips with them where you spend part of the time doing some kind of work in the wilderness and camping. And this opened up just a whole new world to me, which has been very meaningful, and it has entered into the artwork too in a very strong way.
And you've collected things along your path, haven't you?
Yes,
Bones. Tell me about
yes.
your two collections you have on your bookshelf.
Well, from the time I was a child, I've been intrigued by bones for both their pure sculptural shape, just their aesthetic, and also I think something more significant, and I don't think I can put it in words right now, but kind of that the whole life-death cycle. I think even as a young child I was had some kind of awareness of that and interest in it, because I remember having a whole drawer full of bones when I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, which I had to empty out to make a nest for the cat to have her kittens in. But I've always picked up things to examine them more closely in nature, and I realized a couple of years ago, gee, I got a lot of bones hanging around. I think I should do something with them, so I created my bone shelf. And then I was on a wonderful trip this fall and kept finding interesting little rock fragments and thought, oh, I think I better have a little rock shelf. I've always picked up rocks too, so now I have my bone shelf and my rock shelf, among other stuff that I have accumulated that you see around the house.
I think it would be a good time now to go and have a tour of your house and see your artwork, and we'll talk about some other things then. We're in Marcia's kitchen now, and this is a kitchen that says, a cook lives here. I look at your dishes and your pots and pans, and you do like to cook, I hear.
I love to cook. I think I got that from my mother. She was a very good cook, a very creative cook. And there were a few things I remember her specifically showing me how to do, but it was more just kind of absorbing and observing the way she functioned, and I'm pretty much the same. I find it very creative. It's like gardening and like painting, because the possibilities are infinite of what you can combine. And once you get to know the basic chemistry and, kind of the basic concepts, then you can just, put together things out of your imagination.
What do you like to
I
cook?
thoroughly enjoy this. I've become pretty much a vegetarian, but I eat extremely well, just cooking for myself. I love to do soups and stir fries and pastas and all kinds of salads, and I love to bake. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I love cooking for friends and just having a few friends over for dinner or brunch.
I remember you used to give cooking demonstrations at things
I
when
did.
you had Cuisinarts
Right.
and all those wonderful things in the kitchen.
I used to enjoy that very much. I've taken quite a few different cooking classes myself over the years, which I loved doing.
When did you have time through all of this, Marcia, to volunteer in the community? And you picked some things that I know were near and dear to your heart.
Well, for one thing, I have always worked part-time. My schedule has always been working just afternoons at the store, and I feel so fortunate in being able to figure that out early on, which gave me the opportunity to have the time to pursue all the other things that I'm interested in. So I've always been able to find time for anything I want to do.
How important has your work with eye care been to you?
It's very important to me. I've been with eye care since the beginning in 1986. I think it's a very important a service in the community, and I have loved the people that I've worked with, the various directors we've had, the other board members, the volunteers, the clients. It's a very loving, caring group. A lot of problems because it is such a emotional kind of thing. But I've learned a great deal from it, and I feel very strongly about being associated with it and helping it to serve the community.
And you got the cookbook going, didn't you? Help
Yes,
with that?
I was on the committee that created the eye care cookbook, which we're still selling.
Good. And where do you sell them?
I think New Pioneer has them, and Prairie Lights Things has some, and we have them at the office, and we bring them out at events like the Pancake Brunch and make them available. But it's a good book, good recipes.
And I bet you're pleased that the Johnson County Art Center has a space now. You said when you first got involved, they had what, a desk and a chair?
A desk at the Civic Center was the beginning, and then we had a little room at the Hall Mall, and it just gradually got bigger and better. Yes, it's been very exciting to see how they've continued to grow and the wonderful exhibits that are put on there. I think, it's a very important part of the community.
Now, speaking of art, let's go into your studio and see your thing. We're entering Marcia's studio, that is also a dining room. And on her wall, you can see some of her things in progress. Marcia, I look around at your studio and I see your paper work that you did earlier and your work that you're doing now. How would you characterize all the different types of art you've been involved in?
Well, I think it's just ever evolving, and as I grow and change as a person, the artwork grows and changes. I see something that sparks a new idea, and I think, oh, I want to try that. I want to explore that. I consider all my work as a wonderful adventure, especially now the paintings, because many of them, when I start them out, I don't have any idea for them. I may have a color, maybe some kind of a general composition, but often I start them abstractly. Now, not some of these newer snapshot ones, and it's like starting out on a wonderful adventure, a trip that you kind of have a sense of where you might go, but you haven't mapped it out, and you haven't determined where it will end, and you don't know what you will encounter on the way, and it's a...
Let's talk about your first, these you said were earlier pieces, correct?
Yes, I discovered handmade paper back in the 80s and took a semester's class in Introduction to Paper Making with Tim Barrett, and then took a second semester with Bob Glasgow on creating artworks with paper. And this opened up a whole new realm for me, and especially when I discovered flax paper, which is what this is made out of and what my jewelry is made out of. It just has incredible qualities, and I worked very organically with it. I began incorporating minerals and semi-precious stones into the jewelry, and started going to the Gem and Minerals show in Tucson, which is a whole new exciting world. But again, it was working with earth materials and was very much related to my wilderness experiences and activities. But then, I really like to go back and forth between different mediums, and I enjoyed changing scale from the jewelry back to I've done some really, big paper wall pieces. But for the past almost 3 years now, I've gone back to painting. And that is continually changing, and it goes back and forth from abstract to representational. In the last year and a half, I've gotten involved with what I title snapshots. And All my life I have kept snapshot albums, and when I travel I always take snapshots, and they are strictly snapshots. I've never had any pretense to be a photographer. They're a record of where I've been and what I've seen and what I've enjoyed, and a reminder of these experiences. So I've begun incorporating these snapshots into the painting, and it's like having two different views of something. For instance, this painting is almost finished, not quite. I still have some more work to do, and it was inspired by a drive last week to Chicago, and observing the snowbanks and both the evergreens and the skeletal trees and the shadows in the snow. I thought was quite beautiful.
It's acrylic, Marcia?
It's acrylic on watercolor paper, and this is from imagination. I didn't actually have a snapshot of that. And this is as though you would see some of the weeds and the growth through the snow. And when I first did it, it was daylight, and that didn't work. So I repainted. I left this and repainted this, and it became night, and the colors worked much better.
And this, how much, I mean, this just evolves over the weeks of painting like this?
More over the days.
Oh, more over the days.
I work.
Okay.
Oh, I work rapidly.
You work rapidly.
Once I
And
start.
What's the story on, where is this?
Oh, that.
from?
The background, I did the painting last, late summer after a wonderful few days at Lake Tahoe. And it's from a snapshot that we hiked with a friend down a canyon, and this was a snapshot from some of the water and the rocks that I found fascinating. And I had another inset in here, and I looked at that, a couple of weeks ago. I thought, oh, that doesn't work. I don't like that so well, so I painted that out. And this was actually done from, or partially done from something I saw in a magazine. So that was one of the few cases where this was not my own snapshot. This is from Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and I had a wonderful week there with close friends. And we hiked all over, we camped there. The friend is one of the experts on Chaco Canyon. He's an archaeologist, and he literally grew up there. And he said, oh yes, I ran barefoot over all these ruins. And so he has such a wonderful intuitive sense of the place, in addition to the knowledge, the intellectual knowledge. So that was a very exciting experience. So this was from a distant view of the canyon wall with some of the ruins here. And this was another snapshot where I was inside one of the ruins looking out over the canyon.
The one I just think is magnificent that you showed me before is the one that you did from Colorado. So do you want to...
Oh, well, this was inspired by some hiking around Silverton, Colorado, which is way up in the mountains. And I was there last fall, early October, when the aspens were just at their prime, and just enjoyed hiking and taking snapshots. So what this is just an impression of the color and the sense of the trunks of the trees against the brilliant blue fall sky. And then this is fairly accurately painted from a little snapshot that I took.
Let's look at another one.
Again, this is one that is not from a personal experience. It's Turkey, but it has led me to want to make a trip to Turkey in the future.
I would imagine that would be on your travel itinerary.
I've never been able to identify exactly where this is located. It's on the Mediterranean, and they are Roman tombs that are literally carved out of the living rock, which I find fascinating. I've always been drawn to rocks. I've always been drawn to caves and tombs and things. So I've really had a wonderful time developing techniques of painting rocks, and am doing more and more with that as a subject.
Collecting more and more rocks,
Right.
I'm sure, on your wilderness
Right.
camping and travels.
This comes from an exciting trip that I made with friends to Canyonlands, Utah, where we backpacked and hiked. And
It's very mysterious.
I was with, there were two archaeologists, and the woman had recently published a book on rock art of the Colorado Plateau. So we were focusing on rock art, and although we were hiking and camping, she was taking us to some, this is a very well-known site, but she was taking us to some more out-of-the-way places that most the public doesn't get to see. So again, it's an impression of the rocks. This is not done from anything specific. And then this is done from a snapshot. And these are very mysterious figures that are painted on these rocks. Like this figure is probably about 15 feet high and looks like something that's come from outer space.
Almost looks like a mummy.
Yes, but it also, the head has an otherworldly quality, and you know, they were anasazi, which is pretty vague, but they really don't know the many different interpretations, and I find this quite fascinating. I've always loved archaeology, and
there aren't many things you don't like, I've decided.
Well, life is so exciting. There's so much in the world.
Oh, and this was at the Artemisia Gallery in Chicago.
Right, yes. I've just had a show in Chicago recently, which was exciting.
Congratulations.
This is the snapshot. I actually painted from two different snapshots of my garden. It's behind the house, and this is the garage back here. And then this is, the rest of it is painted from imagination, but it's the sense of looking at the garden very close up. The end of the summer, things are beginning to decline a bit, but showing the rich, just the richness of it, the design and the color and the growth and the life that's there.
And you see that when you're down there weeding.
I do. I see it very close up.
That's just. And tell me, you're going to be showing your things at a gallery in Cedar Rapids, too?
In Marion. It's the Campbell Steel Gallery, and it's right on the town square in Marion. It's a wonderful gallery. They've been handling my work for several years now. So in March, I will have a two-person show with a paper artist from Cedar Rapids. So that's what I'm preparing for, and some of these will go into it as well.
Now, you've always drawn, and I heard from admirers that you draw beautifully, and there's a drawing of your children that I would love for you to share. Would you?
Oh, I did this in 1978 and did it from photographs of my two children, Kyle and Cyril. It was after Kyle's death. It had been about 3 years since he died. So it was a way to express his spirit and the idea that his spirit is still with us, with the kind of the full color of Cyril, and then in a more spiritual sense, and then just setting it in on Iowa landscape.
Cyril is an artist.
She is. She does all kinds of interior decorative finishes, faux marbling and big murals and tables, all kinds of wall finishes. You give her a surface and she can transform it into anything you'd like. She's very talented and works hard. I'm proud of her.
She has that genetic code, the artistic
gene
code, doesn't she?
Yes.
Tell me what you're working on now.
Well, this is a piece that's probably 2/3 done, but it gives you an idea of how I work. I cover this section up to begin with, and then I paint the background. And it's just a feeling of rocks and color and texture. And then I come back and I'm painting this from a little snapshot that I took in Arizona in a canyon outside of Tucson that I hiked with a friend. And as you can see, I'm not doing it just exactly like the snapshot. I'm leaving the figures out. It's probably, this area is probably about 2/3 done. I really enjoy doing that delicate close-up work, but then I have to counterbalance doing these big, broad, abstract things. I wouldn't like to do that full time.
So you don't know where you're going with all this? I mean, what next? Something on your travels?
Something could spark a whole new direction, and I'd be ready to take off and try it.
Where do you think you'll be traveling next? Do you know?
Yes, 2 trips I have planned. Cyril announced she'd like to go on a wilderness trip with me, which surprised me as she's a big city girl. So we're planning a trip for Idaho for the summer where we will do 2 days of river rafting, 2 days of horseback riding, which is her thing, and I haven't done since I was a teenager, but I figure if she can do the other, I can learn to horseback ride up in the mountains, and then several days hiking.
Oh.
And I'm very excited about it. I think it'll be a very special for both of us. And then in September, I'm doing a walking trip in England, in the Lake District, with a friend for 8 days.
Well,
So,
this sports queen from high school is still moving
Onward and upward,
And I hear you're
yes,
even
yes.
rollerblading. Is that true?
I love to rollerblade, yes. And I cross-country ski, and I've got ice skates. And
Well, your story is marvelous, and
Well,
it's been such a privilege to be in your house. Thank you for letting us come in with our cameras and some strangers, and I appreciate it so much.
thank you, Ellen. I've enjoyed talking with you.
This broadcast has originated in the home of Marcia Wegman. Today we have seen and heard some of her many dimensions. Gifted with an aesthetic sense, art runs through everything she does, whether it's gardening, painting, designing, or even cooking. Marcia loves to explore ideas of the mind and the heart and the spirit. She has suffered much loss, and yet her courage and creativity have sustained her through it all. Marcia Wegman is one of a kind.